everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori La Bey, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about dementia change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori La Bey, and I'm thrilled you can join us today. If you are new to our show, Alzheimer Speaks was created because of my own mother who lived with dementia for 30 years. I got kind of tired of my voice not being heard and hers not even being considered in part of the conversation. So Alzheimer Speaks is really about connecting people to services, products, and tools all around the world and collaborating with one another, inspiring one another of what is possible when a diagnosis of dementia hits. So maybe, just maybe, you can be our next guest. If you are looking for resources, check out alzheimerspeaks.com. We have one whole section that has just a variety of things that you can tap into. You will also find our book tab. So if you have children who you're trying to explain this to, maybe it's your own children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, Betty the Bald Chicken is a great book to open up that conversation and get people talking about being different and what that feels like and how we can help one another. I also want to give a shout out to Arbor Oak Senior Living and Cedar Creek Senior Living and Andover YMCA on June 10th. I'll be out there. We're going to do a screening of the film A Timeless Love, and we'll be doing a talk back from 10 to noon. And if you're interested, you can go and call 763-230-9622 and make your reservation to be part of that event. It'll be a lot of fun. We are going to be talking today about the magic of music and how do you leverage that in dementia care. And so I'm just really thrilled that we'll be talking with Tara Jenkins, who is a board certified music therapist. She is also a certified dementia practitioner and a Montessori dementia care professional with over 16 years of experience working in the elder care field. She is the co-author of the book Music, Memories, and Meaning, How to Effectively Use Music to Connect with Aging Loved Ones. And it is fabulous. It is one of the best books I've seen out there regarding this topic. And it's something you'll be able to use as a tool and start implementing right away. And she is also the founder of Harmony in Dementia, which provides group and individual music therapy services, music consultation services, and music workshops, and then training for older adults, carers, and professionals. So we are going to have a lot to talk about, and it's going to be an absolutely fabulous conversation. So I am so excited, Tara, to have you on the show today. I know this is going to be a fun conversation, but before we dive into all the questions I have for you, I always like to ask everyone if they've been personally touched by dementia in their own family or circle of friends.
Sure. I had a grandmother who lived with dementia and some additional mental health diagnoses when I was in high school. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what started my journey. You know, I was fascinated by, when I made a connection with her and why that was the case. And, at that point I didn't know anything. So, it kind of really started my passion as I started to explore this as a career and, exploring music therapy in general, and then moving on. And then, of course, all the knowledge that I've gained since she was in that nursing home when I was in middle school and high school, now so many things make sense, or so many things, you make those connections afterwards, when you know more, and that kind of a thing. So yeah, that's kind of how it was connected to me personally. But
Wow. So, so you've got this personal connection, but when you started in, music therapy and stuff, was there something you saw in the field too that said that told you, I just this is what I want to do full time?
yeah, so when I was in high school, I was in all the things, I was all the extracurricular, so drama, band, and I knew I wanted to pursue music, but I didn't really want to teach, I didn't really want to perform, and that's kind of how I discovered music therapy. And then when I went to school, our first practicum, which are kind of like rotations, we do different practicums each semester with different groups of folks, and the first one was with older adults. And so it was a group in a nursing home. And for me, that was kind of it. Like I clicked with those folks and those individuals so much. And I just really felt almost like a calling. I really felt that I had this connection with this group of people. And I explored lots of other age groups and different populations and things like that, but I kept coming back to older adults, and I kept coming back to dementia, and eventually I did my 6-month internship at that same nursing home where I had the practicum, and then the rest is kind of history. It's now 16 years later, and I'm still working with older adults.
Wonderful. Well, we probably should define what the heck is music therapy, because you
Yeah.
said, you didn't really want to act and you didn't really want to perform. So what are you doing?
Yeah,
How you do
yeah.
it?
So the kind of official definition is it's music therapy is a clinical and evidence-based practice that uses music to accomplish individualized goals and objectives. And so essentially, we're using different aspects of music to achieve individualized goals, and that's both in and outside of sessions. So, we're seeing progress both when we're there with the client, and then the hope is, can we translate that outside, of our session time? And one of the things that I love about music therapy is how personalized we can design a session depending on who's sitting in front of us. And we do this in a lot of different ways. We, of course, start with an assessment. So we assess the strengths and the needs of each client and their interests and, what they want to get out of therapy. If it's a family member who's coming to us for services, same thing, we're getting their history and what they're looking for. And then we provide treatment, and that can include doing, creating music together, singing, moving, listening to music, songwriting, lyric analysis. The possibilities are really endless. It just kind of depends on who's in front of us. And we focus on social, emotional, cognitive, physical communication, musical, and spiritual needs. So we don't necessarily focus on all of them with every client. But again, it goes back to their needs and interests and what's going to benefit the client the most.
Wow, that's a real wide variety.
Yeah.
I think so many of us, we just think of music and we like it or we hate it. It's leave it on the channel or change it,
Yeah, yeah.
type thing. And I think people don't understand how music really affects our moods.
Hmm.
And I was amazed. I know my mom had a music therapist come in, and then just some musicians come in too, and how they could swing her moods was just incredible and elevate them.
Yeah.
It was really, really fun to see with all of that. So, you know, for the benefits for the older adults, can you give us some examples of those?
Sure. Yeah. So there are lots of benefits. And, talking about mood, that's a huge one. So we can even just start there, but supporting positive mood and emotional states.
Mhm.
So when we're thinking about that, I've been called in before I've kind of worked in lots of different uh, um, communities in different ways. So I'm in private practice now where I go in and then I leave. But at one point I was a full-time music therapist in long-term care. And so what's really great about having a full-time music therapist on staff is you can call them in a moment of crisis, right? And you can still do that when we work with hospice and we work with social workers. If an individual's having a crisis, we can still go. But if you're there in the community or in the facility, obviously it's a lot easier.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I was called for this moment of crisis for a client that I saw individually, and they weren't entirely sure what kind of triggered or his agitation, but all of a sudden he was incredibly agitated. He was in crisis. His fists were clenched, his facial muscles were tense. He was kind of holding there was like a bar on the side of one of the walkways that he was holding on to, and he was in a wheelchair and he was just distraught. And so they asked, can you do something? We've tried everything. And so I sat with my guitar. I knew, what music he enjoyed. He was huge John Denver, big in country music. That was kind of his thing. And, in music therapy, we have something called an ISO principle, which is matching someone's individual where they're at. So you would start music that is kind of more intense or louder or faster. You kind of match where his mood is. And then the idea is to bring it to that ideal place. And so in this regard, I just wanted to give him some peace, and what that looked like kind of changed throughout our time together. But I was able to share different songs with him and change, how fast I was playing something, how loud I was playing something. And that's when, recorded music is wonderful, but a music therapist being able to change dynamics and tempo and key changes if needed, that's where all of our training comes in. And so by probably 15 to 20 minutes of this, eventually his facial muscles started to relax. He was no longer clenching his fists, and by the time I left, I want to say there maybe 30 minutes had passed. He was asleep. His eyes were closed, he was relaxed. And then they were able, I believe it was something care related, but so they were able to then check on him and do what they needed to do, the nursing staff. So that's just a great example when talking about what you're saying, and it could be something where you're in crisis, or it could just be, an individual is maybe just having a tough day. Maybe it's not something specific, or they're not acting out, but they're just kind of down and out, and music can pick us up. Creating positive engagement and stronger self-esteem and identity. This is a big one. I'm currently seeing a client individually who's a music educator. And so he is a professional musician as well. And on his principal instrument, he no longer can play to the ability he used to. And he's very aware of that. And so that's something to keep in mind too, that sometimes that can be so frustrating, especially if they were a musician, that we want to see, okay, how can we still make music meaningful? And so we don't work with that instrument, but he has so much knowledge in music theory and able to play by ear. And so I have an instrument called an auto harp. It's a folk instrument, and it's got a lot of strings, but you press a button and that's the chord it plays. So you press C, it plays the C chord. And so he can play by ear. I'll sing Down in the Valley, or I'll sing You Are My Sunshine, or we're in Austin, Waltz Across Texas. And he's able to do those chord changes. I'll tell him the key, we'll play through the chords, and then we'll create music together. So that looks very different for an individual who has a music background. But I also want to share, you don't need formal training in music to receive the benefits of music therapy. So, again, going back to that individualized treatment, we meet the client where they're at and then kind of decide what we do in the moment. Another big one is for helping with feelings of isolation and loneliness. And I think we all experienced this during COVID, but this was something in long-term care and with older adults that was being experienced. We were seeing it long before COVID, but I think it shined a light, I think, because all of us were experiencing it. So then we could identify, a lot of folks who weren't in long-term care could then identify, oh, if I'm feeling this way in my home, what does this individual who's in an unfamiliar place or who isn't seeing their family and friends? And so music is a great way to bridge that gap. And again, that can look a lot of different ways too. So sometimes it's working with someone individually, maybe they used to be very social and they used to be out and about, and maybe they had a fall, maybe they had just a decline, maybe their disease is progressing and they're kind of aware that they can't keep up in conversation or that sort of a thing. And so maybe they used to kind of be this social butterfly, and now they're retreating to their room more and more. So individually, I could start working with them and sharing music individually, and then slowly, can we invite one of their friends to join us for music in their room, in their space? And then can we transfer that? Oh, your friends, Joe and Mary, they're just sitting in the common area there. Do you want to come out and join? So again, it's working on goals and objectives. What is our goal for this client? Is it something to get, we'll say Beth, is it trying to get Beth to socialize again? And if that's it, if it's trying to get her reconnected because that's important to her, how can we do that through music? So that's kind of another example with that.
Well, those are all great. I just remember, for us as a family, we didn't understand the power of music. My mom was always in the choir at church, and she loved to sing, and she always liked music, but we never thought of it as a tool to be able to be used. And after we had, somebody come out and work with her, we realized, well, we could do some things ourselves to improve her quality of life. We could never do what you guys do, but we were much more conscious of music. And I think it's something that we just all take for granted out there, and we don't really look at how powerful it is. I mean, I know I can be driving in the car and I can start sobbing because a song triggers me, or I can just be in a good mood and the memories are rolling, back when I was in high school and things like that. And all of those things still exist no matter what age we are, because they're just tied to such strong emotions. And emotions are a lot of times one of the last things that leave, especially with a person with dementia. They might not know why they have those emotions or what's triggering them anymore, but they're there, and there's different ways to deal with them. But I was surprised how you could bring my mom kind of out of a dead sleep and just full of joy, and her hands are going and her toes are going, and she's smiling and giggling and laughing and trying to remember as many of the words that she could. She knew the rhythm, but she kind of lost her words, there towards the end and stuff. But those are just such powerful moments. And I think it really makes families look at what's possible, because, we have people who tell us, oh, you don't need to go see them anymore because they don't know who you are. But when you see that, there's a lot more going on within them.
Yeah. And I always say, in a lot of trainings and education that I do for caregivers and professionals is focusing on loved ones' abilities, what they're still able to do. And as you're saying, music can bring out a lot of their strengths. I get to see the best in folks a lot of times when I'm working with them musically. And music is centered throughout our brain, so it's not just in one area. And so going back to how emotions is one of the last thing, music is the same way. It's one of the first things we can connect to in the womb, and it's one of the last things as we're making that transition that we're still able to connect to. And it's also something a lot of times, I'll sometimes get referrals or people will reach out when they've tried everything. And they're like, I want my loved one or my client to be engaged, but nothing is working or nothing is clicking, or they're not interested in much. And a lot of times music can be beneficial. It's non-pharmacological and it can be a great resource. And like you said, a great tool. And, you can't practice music therapy, but again, a lot of the training and the education that I give is talking to folks about how can you use music in a meaningful way. And like you said, there's so much that you can do as a caregiver, as a professional, that can go a long way with that individual. And then of course, calling in a music therapist as well. But
yeah, I remember, we learned different tools as a family. Like my in terms of engagement, especially with my mom towards her end stages. My daughter would always like paint her nails because that's a
Oh,
really
yeah.
intimate thing to do. I
Mm-hmm.
would always have my bottle of lotion, and my brothers weren't touchy and feely, but they could push a CD player,
Mm-hmm.
and back then that's what we had was a CD
Yeah.
player. They could put on Frank Sinatra for her, and she would light up. And
Mhm.
the other comment I wanted to make too was you had mentioned, from womb, babies hear that music, they can recognize it once they're out. But a lot of times I think people don't take it to the other end of the extreme when it's end of
Yeah.
life or someone's kind of comatose. They're still taking all that stuff in. And I
Hmm.
think I personally have witnessed where that has brought some peace and comfort. Um,
Yeah.
and I know hospice uses music therapists a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I've not worked for hospice directly, but when I was full-time in long-term care, the hospice that came in, we worked pretty closely and I got referrals that way. I've also worked with folks who are living with dementia who are transitioning into end of life. So they're an individual client who I've seen many years. So
Mhm.
I've seen them through the different moments in their journey. And so that can be really powerful. And again, if you have a music therapist who's on board,
Mhm.
you can bring us in at the end, but if we're there before that, then we have all of that knowledge, all of that rapport with that client, all of their musical preferences at our disposal that we can use in those final moments or in those final days or, whatever the case may be. I had one individual who was in quite a lot of pain
Mhm.
as she was starting to transition on hospice. And, I would come in for that hour and it was the only time she wasn't calling out. It was the only time that she had this relief. And so I worked with the nursing staff, she had a CD player. And so could we try recorded music? And it wasn't as beneficial, but there was some help there. So, but I think part of it was too, I worked with her for years. She knows my voice, she knows my voice. She may not be able to make eye contact with me anymore. She may not be able to vocalize or verbalize with me anymore, but there's a familiarity of who I am and, the music I'm bringing. And yeah, that can be very powerful on the end stages as well as at the beginning of life. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when my mom was in a nursing home and she was really struggling taking showers, and she would
Hmm.
get kind of combative. And, I went into the executive director and I had talked with Teepa Snow, and she said, use a handheld shower head that's a rain shower head, start at the feet, and, explain that, fat pads and stuff had disintegrated so the nerves were closer to the top.
Hmm.
And so when I went into the director, I donated a bunch of shower heads, and then he's like, "Oh, we're redoing the bathrooms. What else do you want?" And I kind of went through this whole thing, and he says, "Anything else?" And I said, "Well, I think one of the most powerful things would be is if you could get your staff to sing in the showers
Hmm.
with people, put on
Yeah.
their music, because
Uh-huh.
that just calms them down." And again, we could never do it how you guys would do it, but it just brings, it distracts and brings fun, and it's,
Hmm.
music's engaging,
Yeah.
and you're part of something else. And so I just thought I'd throw that in there because that was.
No, definitely. I've worked with individual showering, I've also I was an activities director
Mhm.
when I first, was finding a job in the field, and bathing and showering and all of that is so difficult for so many for the reasons you mentioned and for lots of other
Mhm.
reasons. Who gets naked in front of people they don't know,
Yeah.
like that alone can be very daunting. And everything you said, setting up the environment, is so important, and music can be a great part of that. You can even start music before you go into the shower, into the bathroom,
Mhm.
and I always say too, because sometimes caregivers or professionals, they're uncomfortable singing, they don't like the sound of their voice. Now, yeah, yeah, and that's totally
That'd be
fine.
me, yeah.
Yeah, but now, we have it at our disposal on our phones.
Mhm.
Now, instead of carting around a record player, a CD player, cassette player,
Yep.
so can you just put a couple songs on a playlist and have that in your pocket and play it? And so you're walking with that individual and maybe you're humming or you're singing if you're comfortable, they're singing. And then you're bringing them into the room. And I know Tipa talks a lot about this, making sure that the temperature in the room, in the bathroom is right, that the water temperature, but also the air temperature, and the lighting, you're setting the mood essentially
Yep.
to make it and setting it so they can be successful and you can be successful in helping them. And that's one thing with music and ADLs in general and activities of daily living. And I do that with education and training as well, is, you can implement music in ways that can really help ease the process with ADL care.
Yeah, because we don't look at it like a tool, like in the shower, you just have
exactly. You don't think about it.
a heated towel bar, or even diffusing oils, can be really nice and complementary. All those different things, but we're looking at the black and white things. Do we have a shower chair? Do we, but we we talk about process and stuff, but it is really about setting the mood and making people feel comfortable with it. I do want to mention, if people are just tuning in, we are talking with Tara Jenkins with Harmony in Dementia. She's a music therapist. You can visit her at her website, harmonyindementia.com, or you can email her at contact@harmonyindementia.com. She's also on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn at Harmony in Dementia. We've just been having a great conversation. So if you missed the first half, reel back. You're going to want to hear it. But let's go ahead and continue here.
Yeah.
I'm always curious about people's business names. Why did you pick Harmony in Dementia?
Yeah, so I was in private practice in the DC area years ago, and then I moved out here to Austin 6 or 7 years, was working with a company. And so when I decided to go back into private practice, I was really trying to think, I'm providing music therapy services, but I also want to provide a lot of support to caregivers and professionals. I'm very passionate about that as well, as we've already been talking. Mm-hmm. And so I started to think, when you create harmony in a group, whether it's singers or instrumentalists, you need different notes to produce that chord, to create that chord, and you can't do it alone. And that's the same with individuals living with dementia and those who are caring for them and supporting with them. It takes a village, right? Everybody's got a support system, or along the way, they start building a support system. Some folks, they start just them and their loved one. And I think that support system is so important for the individual living with dementia, but also the caregiver. A lot of times that caregiver is all of their needs, their wants, their health, everything. I know I don't have to speak to that to you being a caregiver yourself, but that all gets pushed aside. And that's also so important, especially with an individual living with dementia. They could live with their disease for 10 years, 20 years, so it's not always a short-term thing.
Yeah. And my mom was 30 years.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And so, you can't do it alone, and it does take a team of people. And so for me, that's kind of what I wanted to convey with Harmony in Dementia is I am providing music services, but it really is much more than that. It's how can we be together in harmony when we're working with folks, when we're caring for folks with dementia, but then also for ourselves as well. I do training and education. I've got something, I think it's Thursday, a little bit later this week, but it's with a company who wanted to provide support for their caregivers. Their caregivers come for resources, and we're doing music and self-care. So that's like another big area where a lot of times we focus on, okay, what are our loved ones' musical preferences and what do they enjoy? And that's all very beneficial. But I also encourage caregivers, write down your musical preferences, write down, what you like to do as far as self-care and things like that. Not only for if, you have a short hospital stay or something happens, crisis, but it also might be a way. A lot of times friends and family reach out and they say, how can we help? And a lot of times we're not sure, or sometimes it's, I need time or I need space. But, you could say, I love John Denver and we've got a record player. Like, do you have any John Denver record? It could be something like that where you're reaching out musically for yourself as well as for your loved ones. So yeah, that's kind of where the name, kind of that focus came from. And my business in general, my private practice, it's from the curiosity and passion that started with my grandmother. I'd make these connections, but I wasn't sure why they were being made, and why, why could she recognize me sometimes and not others? And so it started there, and then it just grew. The more education and the more knowledge I had, both in dementia specific and then also music therapy, for me, it's meaningfully connecting with others. That's kind of the big takeaway. How can I meaningfully connect with folks through music, whether it's education and training, music therapy services, consults, basically, no matter how I'm interacting, I want to do that in a meaningful way.
Well, and I love your explanation. And to me, harmony means peaceful and joyful. And who
Yeah.
doesn't want that? And a lot of times people dealing with dementia don't think that's even possible.
Yeah.
This calmness at times. And then when you talked about, it's blended, it really is kind of that team effort and not forgetting about yourself. I think I know I forgot about myself, and
which is understandable and easy to do, right?
Real easy to do, but really detrimental for yourself and for the person you're caring for. And if they can, it just as easily, like you say, make that playlist and realize what's good for dementia is good for them too.
Yeah,
they can take advantage of that, and they can have that playing in the background, maybe when they didn't think they really needed it, and now they know it's a tool that'll help calm them down, give them some peace and stuff. So I think that's really important. Can you explain? I know you deliver a lot of different types of services, and you touched on some of them, but let's just go through each of them individually for people.
So I provide music therapy services, which we've talked a lot about, and I provide both group and individual services. So group services are a lot more in a community setting. And so when I'm doing those types of services, I'm bringing singing, moving, listening, and playing activities. So lots of different instruments, percussion, recorded music, live music. One thing I say is, as a music therapist, I sing and I play guitar, but sometimes, you mentioned Frank Sinatra for your mom. I'm never going to sound like Frank Sinatra. Yeah. So, sometimes hearing that voice will trigger a different memory or a connection. It'll make those neurons will fire and connect in a way that maybe they wouldn't if I was singing it. So I do think recorded music plays an important role when working with folks living with dementia. So I'm always sure to incorporate at least one or two recorded songs when I'm working with groups and individuals. And so group services can look a lot of different ways, but a lot of times it's really about connecting individuals to each other. So peers, making those peer relationships. So it's a lot of social goals, but it's also reminiscent discussion. So encouraging reminiscence and building upon that, sharing memories, getting folks to move, talking about music as a motivator for exercise. We do movement in all of my groups. And it's movements that I know that are safe and easy for folks, movements that I've worked with PTs in the past and things like that. And so we're doing a lot of different things in a group setting. And then in an individual setting, I kind of gave some examples earlier, but there I can tailor a program and treatment even more so than in a group setting, because in a group setting, I'm going to have folks who are in their 50s, their 80s, their 60s, I might have lots of different ages. And so I always make sure I've got music that's going to hit all of those different age groups within one session. But with an individual, if they love disco, that's where we're going to live. We're going to use other styles of music, but if that's what really motivates them, then that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with their preferred music. And then again, it's just figuring out, what are within assessment, what are our goals and objectives, and then tailoring that plan to them. But I also provide music workshops, education, and training. And so that can be webinars, interviews like this, where I'm kind of talking with folks, trainings for staff on how to use music in the community. So ways that, like we were talking with ADLs, the same with caregivers, how they can also discover music preferences. It's not easy to do if your loved one can no longer tell you. And, not all family members, know their loved one's music preferences. If music wasn't prominent in the home growing up, then they might not have anything to think back to as what their loved one enjoys. And so there's lots of different ways that you can discover preferences. So I talk about that in trainings and things like that. And then consultation services, that can be for a community. So if an activity director has volunteers and they want them to use music in a meaningful way. A while back, you had us on for Music, Memory, and Meaning, which was a book that I co-authored. And so that would be a great way to do a consultation with that activity director and say, hey, you can use this book, you can give it to your volunteers, I can do a training with the volunteers, I can consult with you, and we talk about building a volunteer music program, but it could also be consulting with a caregiver. So it could be maybe 1 30-minute consult, or it could be frequent. Maybe we meet monthly and someone's caring for their loved one in the home and they're like, okay, like we said, bathing is really difficult. How can music help? Or this is what's currently going on. Do I need more than what I'm providing? And can a music therapist help? Who do I need to reach out to? And all of these services I offer them virtually and in person. And virtually, when it comes to music therapy services, that really depends on the individual, and it depends on where they're at with their disease, and kind of we decide, is it beneficial, for them to receive services virtually, and if it's not, then I would refer out. I'm connected to folks throughout the country, in other countries as well, so I'm able to say, hey, I have this client, they're in need of music therapy. Is there someone in person? And virtual services, in COVID, obviously we were all trying to do everything we could, but I actually was on Skype long before COVID with an individual. I lived in Maryland in private practice, and then I moved here, and it was a husband and wife, and they wanted to continue services. Their son was very involved in their care, and we were like, let's just try Skype. And at that point, nobody was really doing it. Like it was kind of happening with traditional, psychotherapy, but even then it wasn't as frequent. And we did it and it worked and they benefited from it. And we did it through COVID and through both of them transitioning and passing away. So, it can be very beneficial for folks, but again, it really just depends on what you're looking for and how that individual responds when it's virtual or telehealth.
Well, yeah, and I totally get that, totally understand that, because some people have a real hard time paying attention or maneuvering, the technology, getting bored, all of those types of things. What do you love most about your job? Because, when you're talking, it seems like there's not an area that you just aren't exuberant about.
I could talk for hours about it. And it's always a hard thing to narrow down when someone asks me that. But for me, it goes back to those meaningful connections, and those connections made through music. And I get to see folks on so many different parts of their journey, from beginning to middle to end stages and everywhere in between, and being able to witness and help foster those connections that they can make with themselves that can bring back a specific memory or moment, or with their family members. Like we were saying, a lot of times family who aren't the primary caregiver, they don't know how to interact with that loved one anymore. That goes for grandchildren, children, adult children. It doesn't matter your age. It's if you're not used to being around folks with dementia, it can be uncomfortable and also frustrating because they might not be the person that you knew of. And so music can really bridge that gap. So I love being able to provide that support and having them have a meaningful visit, and a way that they can take that memory, instead of the memories when their loved one is frustrated or confused. And those memories are going to be there too. But can music help facilitate some positive interactions as well? I love seeing when, like you were saying, going back to your mom, hearing a song that maybe they haven't heard in 20 years, and all of a sudden they know the chorus or they know the rhythm, or their face lights up. Maybe they're not singing, but you can tell that that song holds a special place for them or has a special connection. And I go back to a clinical story in my internship that still stays with me today. It was a woman who was living with MS, but was noticing she was living full time in a community, but was recognizing that her memories were leaving her. She was very aware that she wasn't able to, her recall was not as strong, but her recall with music was, to this day, it's one of the most impressive. She could hear any song and have a very detailed memory associated with it, that the music, and sometimes it was a song that, you know, it wasn't what the lyrics were saying. It's because it's where she was when she heard it. You know, she heard When the Saints, and this is, you know, 17 years ago, and she was like, oh, that song, we used to go to the canteen, and it was a place where young people hung out, and I went with my boyfriend, and we'd play it on the jukebox, and we'd dance, you know. And so she had so many of these memories, so we put together kind of a life review. So, you know, it was all in her words, and it would be the song title, and it would be what her memories were associated with it. And then I was able to, you know, when my 6 months was done and she was transitioning to a different therapist, I was able to leave that with her. So it was something that when folks visited, they could read through it. They could also share those memories with her. So if, you know, she could no longer recall it, Bicycle Built for Two was another big one for her. You know, some of these songs that now I'm not sharing quite as much, but, you know, again, this was 17 years ago, but it was so impressive. You know, White Christmas was another big one, and she loved when Bing and Danny Kaye dressed like Rosemary Clooney when they sang Sisters. So that was one that she had memories of her sisters and would always make her laugh when she heard that song. So yeah, for me, it's all about those connections. And that's, you know, what stays with me, whether I had a client 17 years ago or saw them 2 days ago. It's a lot that I carry with me. And then, you know, there are tools in my toolbox as I go to treat other folks as well.
Well, you know, it's interesting because all the songs you brought up were songs that my mom loved. You know,
Yeah.
she's been gone since 2014, but she would just light up, just absolutely light up. You know, when she would hear some of those songs. And but one of the things I wanted to ask you, because a lot of times people will like scold a care partner if
Hmm.
they are singing like an old lullaby. That's
Yeah.
childish. You shouldn't be doing that. What are your thoughts on that?
So for me, it comes to the meaning behind it. You know, I think it's the same thing, calling someone by a nickname like
Mhm.
sweetie or
Yep.
honey. I think it all depends on what the intention, the meaning, and if that individual, maybe their nickname was honey, maybe that's what everyone knows them by, then that's very different, right?
Yep.
And kind of the same with music. You know, there's a lot of research that the music from our late teens, early 20s is the music that's going to stay with us the longest and that we're going to be connected with. But I always say try and experiment. You know, there's nothing wrong with, and sharing new music is activating your brain in a different way. You know, it's so there's positives to that. But when you think of a lullaby like You Are My Sunshine, that's
Mhm.
one that I feel like people think of a lot. For me, it goes back to intention. You know, I had an individual who their mother sang that for them. So
Mhm.
it was a very comforting lullaby to have. So the
Mhm.
meaning was there. So it was important to share that song. And so I think, like with anything else, you know, if the intention and the meaning is there, and it always breaks my heart when someone's scolded,
Mhm.
trying their best to use music. Again, I think there's a different way to go about it. You know, I don't know that I'd share Row Row Your Boat, right? To
Mhm.
me, that connects me more to a younger song. However, if it's someone who they live by the water, they had a rowboat, they, you know, again, like if the meaning and intention matches up and it's a song that they're connecting with and they're singing and they're
Yeah.
getting benefits out of it, then I might reconsider that. You
Yeah.
know, so I think it all goes back to intention and meaning. But yeah, I'm of the belief, especially if you're caring for someone in the home, or if you're a caregiver, a professional caregiver out there, you know, a lot of times we're being a detective with
Mhm.
dementia, and that's in my job as well as a music therapist. You know, if I don't know someone's music preferences, I have to start somewhere. So
Yep.
starting with their age and then figuring out, okay, they, you know, at this time period, they were 1960s. So
Mhm.
maybe that's where I'm going to start, but I'm also going to bring in music from other decades. I'm going to bring in other styles because again, if it's songs your parents sang to you or whoever took care of you as a child, then we might still be sharing Sentimental Journey.
Yep.
I have a client now who his mother loved Doris Day. sang it in the house. And so that's a song we always close with because it's very meaningful to him. And it's one that he loves and reminds him of his mother. So I'm not going to deprive him of that because it doesn't match up with what he should be listening to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what people think, or like when you mentioned row, row, row your boat, I'm thinking it could tie into Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts or something like that, fun time, or the old church songs that, were really for little kids, but it was something that was just part of their life. And when you mentioned You Are My Sunshine, that was one of my mom's favorites. In fact, we sang that at her wake, at her funeral, at her celebration, and everybody joined in singing, and everybody walked out on a real high note and said, boy, we really got to know your mom, during this process and stuff. And it wasn't, but I remember being scolded, and I remember telling one person, don't you dare. You don't know what brings my mom joy.
Well, and that's the other thing too is, I always say that to caregivers, like, your loved one the best, especially if you're the primary caregiver. If you're the primary caregiver, at the end of the day, you're making the decisions that you think is best. And that can look a lot of different ways. And a lot of people are going to have a lot of opinions. Just
like they do on everything else.
Exactly. And so, and it's really hard to navigate that. But I think, if you know what brings her joy, or if you can see that in the moment, and I give you credit for standing up, because a lot of people say, oh, I guess I shouldn't do that. And rightfully so. Like, you don't want to be, that doesn't make you feel good to be told that. And then you think, oh, am I doing my mother, my loved one, a disservice? Did I do something wrong? Am I causing harm? And that's something I always like to bring up too. We talk about all these positive interactions with music, but music, because it's so deeply connected with emotions, can bring up a lot of different types of emotions. And so, I always say in my groups, you're in a safe space. If somebody is teary-eyed or is upset, it's okay to cry. Sometimes, a caregiver might say, somebody, like a private duty aide or a CNA might say, oh, they don't want to see them upset. And so they mean well. And for me, it's okay that they're upset. And as a music therapist, I can process that verbally, non-verbally with the music. But it's always something I like to share when caregivers are listening, to be aware that those emotions might come up and your loved one might not be able to tell you why. But if you can be there with them, and maybe you hold their hand, or maybe you give them a tissue, you show that support and that emotion. And then, of course, if that tearfulness and, that upset, or if there are certain reactions become consistent, then that's when I would say, reach out to whoever your support team is, reach out to a music therapist, social worker, doctor, and see if there's something else going on there. But music can bring back all of those emotions, and that's okay. It's more about how we help support our loved one to navigate that. And that's when that becomes tricky if you don't have the training and the expertise.
Oh, exactly. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because it is all kinds of emotions. I mean, it could be, I've seen people be triggered by taps because they didn't have a good experience in service, or they, it was a real traumatic, situation where maybe they lost a lot of men, and it triggers, I mean, it can be all kinds of stuff. Stuff.
I had, I can't remember the song now, but it was a song about water. I think it was a folk song, The Water is Wide. It was just a very traditional folk song. And the woman had an experience with someone who had drowned, so something that I wouldn't have ever connected with that. And it was in a group, and she got very upset, and she was able to communicate that to me. And so when that happens in a group setting, I really gauge it. If someone can communicate to me why they're upset, I ask right away, do we need to switch songs? And if they say yes, then we're going to switch songs, and I'll share with the group. Sometimes it brings up feelings and we don't want to hear it, but most times people are okay with sharing the song. They want to grieve. They want to share that emotion. And now if they can't verbally tell me, I'll go over to them. I'll hand them a tissue, especially in a group setting. In an individual session, it's going to look a lot different. But in a group, I'll go over and I'll encourage the group to keep going if we're playing to a song or singing or whatever we're doing. And I'll kind of check in with that individual and see where they're at. And if it feels like we can keep going, we will. If it feels like we need to change gears and change songs, we'll do that. And we've had a lot of beneficial discussions that come out of that, about talking about our emotions, and again, depending on the group and who's there. Sometimes, in an assisted living group, it was a song, All I Have to Do Is Dream by the Everly Brothers. And the husband started to share that his wife, everyone in that group knows that his wife has dementia and is in the dementia building of that, care community. Yep. And others have loved ones in there as well. And so, he felt comfortable sharing. It was a safe space. He knew those folks and shared, it reminds me of my wife. And, the other day I saw her and she didn't remember me. And that was really hard. But this song is bringing me joy, but it's bringing me sadness, because that's the other thing. Most times the song isn't going to just bring us one emotion. Mm-hmm. It's not going to connect us to one emotion, or sometimes it connects us to one moment, but it's also a song that they dance to. So for him, a lot of emotions were coming up, and we were able to process that together, and we were able to talk about it and share music. And then others were able to share their stories that helped him. And then it really became this beautiful support system with his peers and with folks who were there with him, every day. So yeah, for me, again, it goes back to, I want to make sure that individual feels safe. I want to make sure that they feel cared for, that they feel heard. A lot of times too, in dementia, a lot of folks don't feel heard. So if I can make them feel heard, whatever that looks like, through music, I want to do my best to do that.
Well, this has just been a great conversation. So thank you for taking the time with us today. I've always learned so much on each and every interview. And I just think music therapy is so important for people to really understand. And you defined it well. You gave us great examples of, how to bring joy and comfort, not only to the person with dementia, but all of us in general, how we can leverage that. So for our listeners, I hope you like, click, and share. Be a giver of hope. There's people in your sphere that you don't know are struggling. And there's so much great information that Tara Jenkins gave us today. Again, her company is called Harmony in Dementia, and you can visit her website, harmonyindementia.com, or you can email her by contact@harmonyindementia. And then you can always find her on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, again, as Harmony in Dementia. Again, wonderful, wonderful program. Thank you so much for sharing and teaching us, more about music therapy, all the different types of services that you offer, and how we can leverage that to care better, not only for someone else, but for ourselves as well. So
yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. And like I said, I can talk for hours, so I appreciate the time.
Oh no, you did wonderful.
Thank you.
In closing, I'll just ask people also to check out alzheimerspeaks.com. We have all kinds of free resources there. Till next time, bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, Jared Sebesti here, host of Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30 or 40 plus years, retiring on Friday, without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.